Hi everyone, this is Grace, and today I'll be walking you through how I made this fun, funky flowers set, so let's go. Now this was originally made for a beginner class, so it's very much beginner oriented. I'm calling this my classic signature beginner structure where we work with one shape and one consistency and a limited number of colors. I know, y'all. Okay, so this one today we are doing flowers, obviously, and my goal with this set was to come up with a wide variety of different flowers that you can do that use a flood consistency and have nothing to do with thicker consistencies or piping tips or all that jazz that usually comes with florals. So that was a fun task for myself. Um, and then yeah, so that was the main goal. I wanted it to be bright and fun. So the colors that I went with are white, of course, teal, this teal here, and yellow and pink. But you could really use whatever colors float your boat. So the key with this design here, um, as a beginner class, we're not going to care about craters, okay? Um, Craters are going to happen. Even as an advanced cookier, I still sometimes get craters. So if you get craters on these little white petals, y'all, whatever, doesn't matter. If you want to take it up a notch, though, the way to prevent craters with this second layer is, first of all, make sure you are using my thick flood. You want to use a thicker consistency. And second of all, you want to do the white petals when the teal is just barely crusted enough. That's usually around like half an hour, 30 minutes, just in front of a table fan, or 15-ish minutes in a dehydrator. Something about that combination makes it so that the top layer is not going to crust. Crust. The top layer is not going to crater. But again, beginners, we're not going to worry about craters because they're going to happen. It's fine. And then I finished it off with this cute little dot in the middle, and it made my heart happy. It's really important when doing those white petals to make them smaller than you ultimately want them to be, because since you're working with a flood and you're not like outlining it first with a piping consistency to really hold it in, the flood is just naturally going to spread out as it dries. So just keep that in mind as you do those white petals. In the sample in the video here, I only used one bag to both outline, flood. Well, obviously outlining and flooding, and you always use one bag. But all the detail work I also did with one bag. If you want to either like take it up a notch with your fine detail skills, and or you really struggle with doing detail work with the bigger bag and you want to have a little more control, hack around that is to actually bag all of the colors in a second smaller bag with like 1.5 to 2 ounces maximum. What that does is it has less icing in the bag, so there's going to be less pressure on the bag weighing down, so the icing will come out less quickly. And you can cut a smaller tip on the bag, which is very exciting, because this tip here is a pretty sizable tip. I usually cut like 6 to 7 millimeters for flood, and then 4 to 5 for piping. So to do like details with a flood tip, it's not impossible, obviously, because I'm doing it here, but it can just be a little more challenging. So that's just a little hack if you want to try it out. This one here, obviously, we could not do Crackle, especially with a beginner set. And I know some people are like, Grace, enough with the Crackle. But here's the thing. When you're working with one consistency, there's only so much dimension and texture that you can achieve with a flood consistency, okay? So this is one of my absolute favorite textures to achieve with a flood because, hello, it's easy, but also all it requires is just any sort of tool, like a pen with a slightly rounded end to it, and that's all you need. In terms of how long you need to dry the icing before you crack it, it varies. It depends on how thick your icing is. If it's thinner, it'll take longer to dry. If it's thicker, it'll take less time. If you're working in a really humid environment, it's going to take more time to dry. Dry, cool environment, it's going to take less time. So generally what I do is I set my timer for 10 minutes and then I check it at that point, and then every 5 minutes after that if it's not quite ready. So what it will look like if it's not quite ready is it'll look more like indentations instead of cracks on the surface. That is a whole other look unto itself. So rock that if you want. I personally just like the cracks. You have to wait like a little bit longer to crack it. Speaking of cracking, so it is not meant to look like a hole. Okay, it is, if you get icing on the end of your tool, you've gone too far. You are literally just cracking the surface. I was just trying to think of like a metaphor, analogy, whatever. I can never remember which one is it, metaphor or analogy. Anywho, that matches this example. I don't know, kind of like a tiramisu, you know, you like crack the surface. Although you don't want to actually go like, we're not eating this, okay? Anyway, I digress. Okay, we did a little flooding in sections there, alternating the sections so that we could get definition in between the colors because, hello, fun. And then we add that little white center, and on most of the flowers, I did this little swirl on top, which A, I think it looks cute, but B, if you get a crater in your center, and it covers the crater. I mean, how brilliant is that? I thought it was pretty brilliant. This next one, I believe, yes, is my wet on wet. So you'll see here when I'm flooding that I'm not flooding all the way to the edge. Very important here. Especially important for beginners. By not flooding all the way to the edge, the icing, you know, is naturally going to spread out a bit. And chances are your cookie is not like completely flat. Like mine appear to be flat, but if you actually held it up, you'd be able to see like there's a slight curve off the very edge. So naturally the icing is going to want to like fall off. If you don't flood all the way to the edge, then it gives the icing some space to spread out without flooding over. So I was just helping the icing settle a little bit because if you are working with a true thick flood, chances are it's not going to completely settle on its own. We are doing wet on wet here, obviously. And what am I trying to say? You want to work really quickly. So you don't want to spend too much time just settling the icing before you actually get to the wet on wet. This here has become, you could say, my newest obsession. Whatever. With design. Wet on wet design. Instead of a bar at the end, like a line at the end, you could also just do a dot and then it will kind of look more like a heart. So for this first one, we are pulling out, and what you don't see off camera is I'm cleaning off my scribe after every pull. That is very important. If you don't do that, you're going to get some pink icing in the center there, which kind of ruins the aesthetic, y'all. This next pull, make sure you're pulling from outside of that line, and then don't go any farther than the center of the cookie, because then you'll manipulate the icing too much. We want to all have this join in the center quite beautifully. Cleaning off my scribe again after every pull. We're going to let that crust over and then just add a little dot in the middle to finish her off. And there we go. This one reminds me of like pink lemonade. I don't know. All right. There are 9 different designs in this set, if I can recall correctly. I love to see when students actually make these cookies and they put their own spin on it. Like they mix up the color combinations, they add some details that I didn't put in there. I love seeing that. That's like the best part, is when you get to put your own touch on it. So if I recall correctly, this is the all white one, which actually kind of looks like a daisy in the end because it has white petals and a yellow center. The edible marker that I used there to mark it off, totally not necessary. you don't have to mark the petals off. I just do that for ease. And if you don't want to use a marker, but you still want to mark it off, you can just use like your scribe or your toothpick to kind of dig in etchings in the cookie. That works as well. And you'll see with the markings, I did not go all the way to the edge. That is very important because obviously we're not flooding all the way to the edge. So if you have a marker going all the way to the edge, then you will see your marker peeking through, which is a little sad. So we're doing flooding in sections here. So we're flooding every other one. We're going to let that crust and then move on to the remaining petals. When I was designing this set, I originally had a 5-petal flower, exactly like this, just 5 petals from a different set from my beginner Easter set. And I thought, well, I'll just use this, that's easy. But the reason I chose not to do 5 petals is because I knew that I wanted to do flooding in sections for petals. And ironically, with fewer petals, it takes an additional step. Because see here, it's a beautiful 6 even number. You just do every other one. But with 5 petals, you have to do this in 3 stages to be able to flood all of them individually without flooding 2 next to each other that are wet at the same time. So for that reason, I decided to go with the 6-petal. And I'm ultimately glad that I did. My white icing here too, I do add a little bit of white gel coloring to it to brighten it up. Chances are any flavoring agent you're using, I use lemon juice, or if you use vanilla extract, that's going to give your white icing a slight tinge to it. You could also use the tiniest bit of purple, but I'm always too afraid to do that. I just use white gel coloring. This is my favorite part here, is adding the little petal lines. Make sure you're giving plenty of space on either side of the lines, and then at the very end to get that visual effect. If you go too close to the edge of each petal, then those lines will probably also connect. And then we're covering the entire center, so all of the joining points of the lines with the dot. And you'll see after every time the dot in the center dries, it spreads out. I love the daisy. Makes me happy. Okay, which one's next? I feel like this must be the polka dots. And again, so I got this comment once in like a review of my classes that they were frustrated that the same techniques were showing up over and over again, especially for the beginner classes. And here's the thing. Like cookie decorating is a series of just the same techniques over and over again. Like, how do you get better at something? By doing it over and over again. And something like here with the polka dots, like, yes, a lot of my beginner sets have had polka dots on them, but y'all, like, mastering the polka dot wet on wet is a very basic and like critical, in my opinion, skill to have or technique to know with royal icing, because there are so many different applications that you can do a polka dot. And the way you get better is by doing it more. And each set has different colors, it has different shapes, different applications. It's all a way to just practice, yes, the same skills over and over. So I very methodically placed my dots in this set and or in this polka dot. I think the key to good polka dots is placement of the polka dots and even size. You'll see sometimes that polka dots like just look right because they're like covering just the right amount of space, and sometimes they look off, at least in my opinion. You can do polka dots in whatever like mishmash manner you want, or you can do them methodically like I tend to do because that's just how my brain works. But so back to the point about repeating techniques over and over. I also find, like I love the students that I have that come back over and over again to take my classes. I think that's freaking amazing. you guys, your support, incredible. I also have a lot of people, excuse me, frog in my throat. I also have a lot of people that are new to my classes. So anyway, um, the point of that, what is the point of that? That I want to be able to make sure that I'm um, showing everyone, the basics that I think that everyone should know. And for these beginner classes, like I don't think that a lot of people understand the feat that is achieved in these classes by using one shape and one consistency. It is extremely rare that you'll see royal icing decorating, especially like advanced people, using one consistency because so much more design and texture and all that stuff can be achieved with multiple consistencies. But my goal with beginner sets is to do one because one is just so much easier to prep, right? Like the more consistencies you have, the more prep it takes. And I find there's a lot of intimidation when it comes to working with royal icing. Like, oh my God, I can't do that. And that's why I try to really simplify as much as I can. So in all of my sets, not just like my class sets, I tend to do some designs that are inspired more like fantasy, like you'll see like the leopard print later. Obviously, there are no flowers in leopard print. And then sometimes I like to do more realistic. And this is my nod to the more realistic. So we're doing the flooding in sections again. And while it takes a lot more time to do flooding in sections, I actually feel like for this design in particular, it's a lot easier. Or yeah, I guess easier. Um to do one petal at a time because this wet on wet technique takes time to do, right? And if you're working with a larger surface, you have to work even faster because you're constantly working against the clock. But with the smaller space, you have more time to work with it, which is awesome. And okay, so we let that crust. The amount of time it takes to crust is like at least 15 minutes. And then we are flooding up against the edge of what's already crusted. So there's a difference, like the outside of that petal is like an outline pressure. And then I use like flood pressure to go up against the seam of the crusted bit. And then we add this white in and we're taking our scribe. And this is one instance where I'm obviously not cleaning it off because I think it looks good. So we're pulling out first, then we pull in, and then we just get messy and we pull in out because I like how it kind of messes up the coloring. I think that's a really nice aesthetic. In terms of the pink that I used, so I've been getting into a deeper rabbit hole with pinks. As many of you probably know, so my royal icing uses lemon juice, and there are some pink brands some pink food colorings that just do not play well in high acidic environments. So I'm not able to use all of the pinks out there. The pinks that I do use are, for the longest time, I only used Wilton. And now I've discovered that AmeriColor, I can also use their pinks. So this pink here is the AmeriColor. Sorry, did I say AmeriColor? Chef Master. I do not use AmeriColor, okay? It's always like very grainy and the pinks never come out to the right pink. This though is Chef Master Baker's Rose. And it is, I guess it's a slightly less, like you see how this pink is not like a candy bright pink. or if that makes sense. Like a cooler, like this is a warmer pink. That's what it is. It's not like a super cool, bright candy Barbie pink. This is a cooler pink, which I like particularly for this set. Sometimes though, I want a really bright, like neon Barbie pink. And when I want that, then I use the Wilton. At this point though, the pink is the only Wilton that I use. And then we let those petals crust before putting the simple little white dot in the center. This is not my usual scribe, but this is the scribe I usually recommend to beginners because it has a nice rounded end that you can use for Crackle, which makes things easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Okay, I think this one is the Leopard. This is another design where people are like, leopard on everything? Y'all, leopard goes on everything. But also, this is another one of my favorite beginner techniques designs because, first of all, it looks great. It is done all with one consistency. It's all wet on wet. And I think it's actually way more forgiving than polka dots. Polka dots need to have like a nice round dot, obviously, and the placement is much more important. With leopard, on the other hand, look at these blobs. They're just meant to look like blobs. They're not supposed to look uniform. They're not supposed to look uniform. So you don't even want to make them all look the same. I love that. That makes it's like way less stressful. It's way more fun. And then you add the second color in and you just kind of like have at it. Sometimes I do 2 around the blob and then sometimes I do 1. Let's see when I do 1. Oh, I keep doing 2. There's 1. And then I'll fill in additional empty spots with just some smaller dot line blob things. And then I think I'm going to use my scribe. Let's see. Yeah. So I'm going to use my scribe to kind of help settle. This is just like next level. If you ever do wet on wet and the icing doesn't like sink into itself and flatten out, that's because it needs a little extra help to settle. So I'm just very lightly jiggling the surface of the icing. That's all I'm doing. So with leopard, you can do any color combination, but I usually try, I didn't quite succeed with this one because obviously the colors are super different, but you usually want to go like the flood should be the lightest color. The first blob should be like the medium color, and then the little lines on top should be the darkest color. Because you want the most contrast coming from that dark color, or you want to have a good amount of contrast, at least in my opinion, with leopard. What do we have next? This might be the last cookie. I wasn't counting. Are we at 9 or are we at 8? Okay. This is the yellow. And another point that I do try to make, especially with the multiple designs in one shape sets, is to always have something really simple because like you don't always need to go crazy and do something different. You can keep it simple and elegant and gorgeous. So in this case, I decided to do just these simple yellow petals, nothing fancy. I'm doing them in sections like I am here, but you could totally just flood the whole thing yellow and that would look beautiful too. Obviously, flooding in sections takes more time. This yellow here is just a standard lemon yellow. You can use AmeriColor or Chef Master. Just a beautiful, bright, vibrant yellow. The great thing about adding, you could barely see that there, that did actually crust over. That cookie like did not move. Wow, I'm very impressed with myself. Okay. The center of these flooding in sections can get a little messy, but the best news, y'all, is that you're just going to cover the center anyway, right? You're going to cover it with your beautiful dot. Mesmerized by my own flooding. Again, using that scribe to help it settle because it is a flood on the thicker end that needs help. Thinner floods, like what I call my thin flood, don't need help settling. They'll settle on their own. And then she crusted, and we're adding just a little dot in the center. Let that crust again. You'll see it's going to spread out. Oop. So keep that in mind too with your dots, that they're also going to spread out. Let that crust, for at least 15 minutes. I feel like there must be one more cookie. Yup. What's the last one? Oh, this one is one of my favorites. I can't believe I forgot about this one. So, this one makes me so happy. What else can I talk about before we get to the actual design? You can see in these corners that I'm touching down. I find with a lot of beginners, they try to just like hover the icing over the whole thing, but you have to, like, when you go to a corner for an outline, you do actually have to touch down and make contact with the cookie, with the icing, before coming back up. And then I am squeezing like a crazy person. So to get those outlines out, because it's a flood, barely any pressure. And then when you go to the flood here, it's like opening a difficult pickle jar. Like, it's a significant amount more pressure. So just keep that in mind. And then she just crusted. We're going to do this little white dot in the center, and we're actually going to do Crackle with this. I don't know how, but I managed to keep the Crackle center to just one cookie. But again, this is like a great technique because it, like, obviously it's not going to crater because you're cracking it before it can crater. Anyway, and then we're adding these little petals here, which is like a take on that white one, except we're doing it with a center. This one also is giving me pink lemonade vibes, like just summer fun. Love this. This set is a great set that can be made any time of year because you can do any color combination you want. You could do like a more fall-oriented color combination. Do this for Mother's Day, whatever. Okay, that is truly the last cookie in the set. As always, I had a blast walking you through this. I hope you learned a thing or two. I hope you try these too. Check out the link to actually purchase the class if it's still available to purchase. And yeah, funky flowers. Love the set. Love y'all, and I hope you have a sweet one.